My name is Jessica, and at 31 years old, I was 7 months pregnant when my husband left me to die in a burning car so he could save his mistress instead. The smell of smoke still makes me vomit, not from morning sickness, but from remembering how he looked at me through the flames, then turned away. A stranger's scarred hands pulled me from death that day, but it wasn't until I served divorce papers from my hospital bed that I truly saved myself. Before I continue this story that changed everything, tell me where you're watching from right now. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever discovered that the person you trusted most was capable of the unthinkable. The signs were there for months before the accident. But when you're pregnant with your first child after 5 years of trying, you tend to see the world through hope-tinted glasses. My husband Daniel had started working late at his accounting firm in downtown Denver, coming home smelling of a perfume I didn't wear. When I asked about it, he said his new assistant Sophia wore too much of it, and it lingered in the conference rooms. I believed him because I needed to. We'd been together since college, 12 years of building what I thought was an unshakable foundation. Daniel had held my hand through 3 miscarriages, countless fertility treatments, and the dark months when I thought I'd never be a mother. When we finally saw that positive pregnancy test last December, he'd cried harder than I did, falling to his knees in our bathroom and pressing his face against my stomach, whispering promises to our unborn child. The pregnancy changed everything, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of bringing us closer each week, seemed to add distance between us. He stopped coming to prenatal appointments after the first trimester, claiming urgent client meetings that couldn't be rescheduled. The nursery I'd started planning sat half-painted because he was too busy to help. When I felt the baby's first kicks, I called him at work, breathless with excitement. He'd sounded distracted, said, "That's great, honey," and hung up within 30 seconds. My mother noticed before I did. She'd driven down from Wyoming for my baby shower, taking one look at Daniel's behavior and pulling me aside. "Something's not right with that boy," she'd said, watching him text throughout the entire party, barely acknowledging the gifts or guests. But I was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, and desperate to believe that stress from his promotion was the only problem we faced. The conference in Aspen was supposed to be a final work commitment before his paternity leave. Just 3 days he'd promised, kissing my forehead as he loaded his suitcase into our SUV. He'd been different that morning, almost manic in his affection, making me breakfast and rubbing my swollen feet. Looking back, I recognize it as guilt manifesting as kindness, but then I was just grateful for the attention. I wasn't supposed to be on that mountain road. The plan had been for me to rest at home while he attended sessions and networking dinners. But when I discovered I'd accidentally kept his presentation USB drive, the one with the quarterly reports he needed for his biggest client, I decided to make the 2-hour drive to Aspen as a surprise. I'd packed snacks, queued up my audiobook, and set off on what should have been a simple act of love. The storm hit when I was 40 minutes from Aspen, sudden and violent in the way mountain weather can be. Rain turned to sleet, coating the winding roads in a sheet of ice that my 8-year-old Honda Civic wasn't equipped to handle. I should have pulled over, should have waited it out, but I kept thinking about Daniel standing in front of his clients with no presentation, his career potentially damaged because of my mistake with the USB drive. I was navigating a particularly sharp curve when I saw them. Daniel's company rental car was pulled over at a scenic overlook, hazard lights blinking through the storm. My first thought was relief that he was safe, that maybe he'd stop to wait out the weather too. I pulled in behind him, struggling to open my door against the wind, one hand protecting my belly as I made my way toward his car. Through the fogged windows I saw them. Daniel and a woman I recognized as Sophia from the company holiday party, the 24-year-old assistant with an MBA, and legs that went on forever. They weren't just together, they were entangled, her dress pushed up his hands in her hair, moving with an urgency I hadn't seen from him in months. The sound that came from my throat wasn't quite a scream, more like the noise an animal makes when mortally wounded. They jerked apart Daniel's face, cycling through surprise panic, and then something worse, annoyance. He gestured for me to wait, holding up one finger like I was an interrupting child while he fixed his clothes. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the wet gravel, sending me falling hard onto my side. Pain shot through my hip and lower back, but I managed to get up to get back to my car. I needed to leave to get away to process what I'd seen somewhere safe. My hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. That's when everything went wrong. In my panic, I'd flooded the engine. The car sputtered, coughed, and died. Through my rearview mirror, I saw Daniel getting out of his car, his face set in the expression he wore when dealing with difficult clients. Not remorseful, just irritated that he had to handle this situation. The electrical fire started under the dashboard while he was still walking toward me. One moment I was turning the key again, the next black smoke was pouring from the vents. The smell of burning plastic filled the car instantly, and orange flames began licking at the windshield from inside. I tried to open my door, but the electronic locks had malfunctioned, trapping me inside. The manual override wouldn't budge. Panic turned to terror as smoke filled my lungs, making me cough violently. I could see Daniel running now, and for a moment relief flooded through me. He would save me. He would save our baby. He reached my driver's side door just as Sophia started screaming from their car. The flames had somehow jumped, maybe from leaking fuel, or just the god's cruel sense of irony, and his rental car's engine had caught fire too. Daniel looked at me, his hand on my door handle, then looked back at Sophia. The decision played out on his face in slow motion. He let go of my door and ran back to her. I watched my husband of 8 years, the father of my unborn child, the man who'd promised to love and protect me, choose his mistress's life over mine and our babies. He wrenched open her door, pulled her out, and helped her run to safety up the hillside. Then he stood there, arm around her, watching my car burn with me inside it. The smoke was so thick I could barely see, but I kept pounding on the windows using my elbow when my hands proved too weak. The heat was becoming unbearable, and I could feel my baby moving frantically as if even they knew we were dying. I remember thinking, this can't be how our story ends, not when we'd fought so hard to exist. That's when the stranger appeared. A massive figure materialized through the smoke, and for a delirious moment I thought it was death coming to collect me. But then I saw his face, scarred and weathered, with eyes that held a determination I'd never seen before. He didn't hesitate, didn't calculate risks. He wrapped his jacket around his fist and punched through my passenger window, the glass exploding inward like deadly snow. "Get your head down," he yelled, his voice cutting through the roar of flames. "I'm going to pull you through." His hands were enormous, calloused from what I'd later learn was years of construction work. He grabbed me under my arms and pulled with a strength that seemed impossible, dragging my pregnant body through the window, even as the flames reached for us both. Glass tore at my clothes and skin, but I didn't care. We collapsed onto the wet gravel just as the car's interior became entirely engulfed, the heat so intense it singed my hair even from 10 feet away. The stranger didn't stop there. He picked me up like I weighed nothing and carried me further from the burning vehicles, setting me down gently behind a boulder that shielded us from the worst of the heat. Then he took off his flannel shirt, pressing it against the worst of my cuts, his hands surprisingly gentle for their size. "You're going to be okay," he kept saying. "You and your baby are going to be okay. I've got you now." I looked over his shoulder and saw Daniel still standing with Sophia, watching us. He hadn't moved to help, hadn't even called out to see if I was alive. Sophia was crying into his chest, and he was comforting her as if she was the one who'd nearly burned to death. The stranger's name was Robert Hawkins, though he insisted I call him Bobby. He was 53 years old, a construction foreman who'd been driving back from visiting his daughter in Denver when the storm forced him to pull over. He'd seen the flames from the road below and came up to help, not knowing he'd find a pregnant woman trapped inside a burning car and a husband who'd chosen to let her die. Bobby stayed with me while we waited for the ambulance, his massive frame shielding me from the wind and Daniel's line of sight. He'd already called 911, given them our exact location, and assured them that despite the cuts and bruises, I was conscious and the baby was still moving. His competence in crisis was something I'd later learn came from 20 years as a volunteer firefighter before a back injury forced him to retire. When the paramedics arrived, Daniel finally approached, trying to take charge with his corporate authority voice. "That's my wife," he kept saying, as if stating the relationship gave him rights he'd forfeited the moment he chose Sophia over us. I need to ride with her to the hospital. Bobby stood up slowly, all 6 feet 4 inches of him, and positioned himself between Daniel and the ambulance. I don't think so, he said quietly. The lady doesn't want you near her. Daniel tried to argue, but the lead paramedic, a woman named Teresa, who'd seen enough domestic situations to recognize one, backed Bobby up. Sir, we can only take one person in the ambulance, and Mr. Hawkins here saved her life. He's coming with us. The ride to Aspen Valley Hospital was a blur of oxygen masks and fetal monitors, but 2 things stood out with crystal clarity. First, my baby's heartbeat strong and steady, despite everything we'd been through. Second, Bobby holding my hand the entire time, his scarred fingers gentle around mine, telling me stories about his daughter Emma to keep me distracted from the pain. At the hospital, the full extent of what happened began to sink in. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Martinez, examined me thoroughly while Bobby waited outside. The baby was fine, miraculously unharmed despite the trauma. I had second-degree burns on my hands from trying to break the windows, dozens of cuts from the glass, and smoke inhalation that would require monitoring. But we were alive. When Dr. Martinez asked about contacting my husband, I broke down completely. The story poured out between sobs, the affair, the choice he'd made, the stranger who'd actually saved us. She listened without judgment, then quietly marked my chart with a note that Daniel was not to be given any information about my condition without my explicit consent. Bobby was still in the waiting room when they moved me to a regular room. He'd been there for 6 hours, this stranger, who owed me nothing, making sure I was okay before he left. When the nurse asked if I wanted to see him, I said yes immediately. He looked uncomfortable in the small hospital chair, his large frame folded in on itself, like he was trying to take up less space. I wanted to make sure you and the little one were all right, he said. And I thought you might need this. He handed me a cell phone, mine apparently salvaged from the scene. Also, the police want to talk to you when you're ready. About the accident, and about what your husband did. What Daniel did. The reality of it hit me again, fresh and horrible. He'd left me to die. He'd looked at me pregnant with his child, trapped in a burning car, and he'd walked away. If Bobby hadn't been there, I would be dead. Our baby would be dead. And Daniel would be what, consoling himself in Sophia's arms. As if summoned by my thoughts. Daniel appeared in the doorway. His clothes were different, cleaned up, no sign of the chaos from hours before. He had flowers, grocery store carnations that seemed almost insulting given the circumstances. Jessica, honey, we need to talk. Bobby stood up, but I grabbed his hand. Please stay, I said, and he nodded, settling back into his protective stance. Daniel's composure cracked slightly at Bobby's presence, but he pressed on. This is all a misunderstanding. You're emotional from the pregnancy and the accident. What you think you saw wasn't what it looked like. I laughed, but it came out more like a bark. What I think I saw. Daniel, you were having sex with your assistant while I was driving through a storm to bring you the presentation you forgot. Then when my car caught fire, you chose to save her instead of me and your child. It wasn't like that, he said, moving closer until Bobby stood again, a silent wall between us. I was going to come back for you. I had to get Sophia out first because she was panicking. You're stronger than her, Jess. I knew you could handle it. I knew you could handle it. As if being 7 months pregnant and trapped in a burning car was something I should manage independently. The gaslighting was so brazen, so calculated, that it actually helped me see clearly for the first time in months. Get out, I said quietly. Get out and don't come back. I'll be calling a lawyer as soon as I leave here. His mask finally slipped completely. You can't divorce me, he snarled. I'll take everything. The house, the savings. I'll even fight for custody. No court will give a baby to a woman who drove recklessly in a storm while pregnant. Bobby moved so fast I barely saw it. One moment Daniel was standing there threatening me, the next he was pressed against the wall, Bobby's forearm across his chest. I'm going to say this once, Bobby said, his voice deadly calm. You're going to leave this room, this hospital, and this woman's life. If I see you near her again, if I hear you've threatened her, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you did on that mountain." I took pictures of the scene before the cops arrived. Pictures that show your car and hers, the positions, the timeline. You left a pregnant woman to die. That's attempted murder in my book. Daniel's face went white. You can't prove anything. Bobby pulled out his phone, showing something that made Daniel's face go even paler. GPS data from both cars. Security footage from the Overlook's weather camera. Your rental car's black box that shows you stopped, got out, then got back in and drove 15 feet to safety while your wife's car burned. I've already sent copies to the police and to my lawyer. So you're going to walk away and you're going to give this woman whatever she wants in the divorce, or I'll make sure you spend the next 20 years in prison. Daniel left without another word, the carnations forgotten on the floor. Bobby picked them up and tossed them in the trash, then sat back down like he hadn't just destroyed my husband with a few quiet words. "I didn't know you took pictures," I said. "I didn't," he admitted. "But he doesn't know that. The security camera thing is real, though. Highway Patrol mentioned it when they were documenting the scene. Your husband is an idiot if he thinks there won't be evidence." The next 3 days in the hospital were a whirlwind of police interviews, medical tests, and life-changing decisions. Detective Sarah Coleman, a woman who'd seen enough domestic cases to recognize patterns, took my statement with a combination of professionalism and barely contained fury. She told me that while proving attempted murder would be challenging, Daniel's actions constituted criminal negligence at minimum, and abandonment charges were definitely possible. My mother arrived the second day, having driven through the night from Wyoming. She took one look at me, bruised and bandaged with monitors tracking my baby's heartbeat, and burst into tears. Then she hugged Bobby, who'd been there when she arrived, with a fierceness that surprised us both. "You saved my daughter and grandchild," she said. "I don't know how to thank you." Bobby, uncomfortable with gratitude, as I was learning was his way, mumbled something about anyone would have done the same. But that wasn't true. Daniel hadn't. He'd made a choice that revealed exactly who he was when it mattered most. Lisa, my best friend since high school, flew in from Seattle on day 3. She was a successful divorce attorney, which felt like cosmic intervention. She took one look at the evidence Detective Coleman had gathered and smiled in a way that made me glad she was on my side. "He's finished," she said simply. Between the security footage, witness statements, and the fact that he abandoned a pregnant woman in a life-threatening situation, no judge in Colorado will give him anything. You're going to get the house, full custody, and probably alimony that'll make him regret every choice he's made. But it wasn't about money or revenge. It was about safety, about ensuring my child never had to depend on someone who'd already proven they'd choose themselves over their family's survival. Bobby visited every day, bringing real food from outside the hospital and keeping me company during the long stretches between tests and interviews. He told me about his life, about losing his wife to cancer 5 years ago, about his daughter Emma, who was a nurse in Denver, about the construction company he'd built from nothing. He never asked for anything, never suggested I owed him, just showed up with coffee and conversation when I needed it most. On the 4th day, Daniel tried one last manipulation. He didn't come himself, probably because Bobby's threat and the pending criminal investigation had finally penetrated his narcissism. Instead, he sent his mother, Patricia, a woman who'd always treated me like I wasn't quite good enough for her precious son. She swept into my room wearing her standard Chanel suit, and disapproval settling into the visitor's chair like a queen granting an audience. "Jessica, this has all gotten out of hand. Daniel made a mistake, yes, but ending your marriage over it seems extreme. Think of your child. Don't they deserve a father?" "A father who left us to burn," I asked, my voice stronger than I'd expected. "Patricia, your son chose his mistress over his wife and unborn child. He watched our car fill with flames and walked away. That's not a mistake. That's showing who he really is." She pursed her lips, the Botox preventing much expression. "He was panicked. People don't think clearly in emergencies. Surely you can understand that." Bobby walked in, then carrying soup from the deli down the street. He took one look at Patricia and positioned himself in his now familiar protective stance. "Ma'am, I was there. Your son wasn't panicked. He made a deliberate choice. Took him about 3 seconds to decide which woman to save, and it wasn't his pregnant wife." Patricia stood clutching her designer purse like a shield. "This is a family matter." "No," Bobby said quietly. "It's a criminal matter. The district attorney thinks so too. Your son might want to focus less on saving his marriage and more on staying out of prison." After she left, I started crying again, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time since seeing Daniel with Sophia, I felt like I had power. I wasn't alone, wasn't trapped. I had Bobby, my mother Lisa, and the truth on my side. The divorce papers were served to Daniel at his office the day I was discharged from the hospital. Lisa had worked around the clock to file for emergency custody, a restraining order, and immediate separation of assets. She'd also been in contact with Sophia's husband, a detail that made everything even worse. Sophia was married had been for 2 years to a deployed military officer who was returning home to this nightmare. I moved back in with my mother, temporarily unable to face the house I'd shared with Daniel. Bobby drove us his truck, carefully navigating the mountain roads while my mother held my hand in the back seat. He helped us get settled, fixed a leaking faucet my mother had been meaning to deal with, and then stood awkwardly by the door like he didn't know how to say goodbye. "You saved my life," I told him. "My baby's life. I don't know how to thank you." He looked at his boots, then back at me. "You just focus on healing and taking care of that little one. That's thanks enough." But I knew it wasn't goodbye. Something had formed between us in those horrible and beautiful moments, something beyond gratitude or obligation. It was recognition, maybe, of one soul seeing another's worth when the rest of the world had looked away. Daniel's world unraveled quickly after that. The criminal charges made the local news. His firm suspended him pending investigation, and Sophia's husband flew back from deployment early to deal with the aftermath. I heard through legal channels that Sophia had thrown Daniel under the bus, completely claiming he'd pursued her relentlessly, that she'd been afraid for her job if she refused. Whether that was true or just self-preservation, I didn't care. They deserved each other's betrayal. The contractions started 2 weeks early on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing custody agreements with Lisa. They were different from the Braxton Hicks I'd been having, deeper and more insistent, like my body had decided it was done waiting. My mother drove while Lisa called ahead to the hospital, both of them trying to stay calm for my sake. I'd been terrified of giving birth alone without the partner I'd planned to have beside me. Daniel was supposed to be there holding my hand, coaching me through breathing exercises we'd never gotten around to practicing. Instead, I had my mother and Lisa, which should have been enough. But as they wheeled me into labor and delivery, I found myself wishing for Bobby's steady presence. As if summoned by that thought, he appeared in the waiting room. Lisa told me later that she'd called him, knowing somehow that I'd want him there. He didn't try to come into the delivery room, just stayed in that uncomfortable waiting room chair for 14 hours, sending messages of encouragement through Lisa and making sure my mother ate something. Emma Grace was born at 2:17 in the morning, 6 pounds and 4 ounces of perfect fury. She came out screaming as if she'd inherited all the rage I'd been suppressing for months. When they placed her on my chest, still covered in vernix and blood, I finally understood what unconditional love meant. Every terrible thing that had led to this moment suddenly made sense because it had brought me her. My mother cried when she held her granddaughter for the first time, whispering promises of protection and love that I knew she'd keep. Lisa took approximately 400 photos in the first hour, declaring herself the official aunt and threatening to buy every pink thing in Colorado. When I was finally moved to a recovery room and Emma was sleeping in her bassinet, I asked Lisa to get Bobby. He entered hesitantly, this giant man trying to make himself small in the presence of something so delicate. His eyes went straight to Emma, and I saw his face soften in a way that made my heart constrict. "Would you like to hold her?" I asked. His hands shook as he picked her up, supporting her tiny head with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone his size. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Just perfect." Then he looked at me with eyes full of emotion. "She's going to be strong like her mama. A fighter." Bobby visited every day I was in the hospital, bringing coffee for the nurses, fixing a broken chair in my room, and holding Emma while I showered. He never overstepped, never presumed, just showed up with quiet consistency that felt like the opposite of everything Daniel had been. The day before discharge, Daniel's lawyer contacted Lisa about signing away his parental rights. He was willing to give up everything: custody, visitation, even financial obligations, if I would drop the criminal charges and agree not to pursue civil damages. It was exactly what I'd expected from him, the ultimate act of selfishness disguised as generosity. I refused. Not because I wanted his money or revenge, but because Emma deserved financial support, even if she never knew her biological father. The criminal charges would proceed regardless of what I wanted. The state had its own interest in prosecuting someone who'd endangered a pregnant woman. And the civil suit. That was about justice, about consequences for choices that could have killed us both. Lisa negotiated brilliantly. Daniel would pay child support based on his previous salary, not the reduced income he'd have after losing his job. He'd maintain a college fund for Emma separate from the regular support. He'd have no rights, no visitation, no say in any decisions about her life. He'd effectively be nothing more than a monthly direct deposit, which was probably all he'd ever been capable of being anyway. The day I brought Emma home to my mother's house, Bobby was there. He'd baby-proofed the entire living room, installed new smoke detectors, and built a rocking chair from scratch that was waiting in the nursery. When I tried to thank him, he just shrugged and said he liked to keep busy. The truth was more complicated and beautiful than that. Bobby had lost his family when his wife died, and Emma and I had lost ours when Daniel revealed his true nature. But sometimes broken pieces from different puzzles fit together in ways you don't expect, creating something new and whole. Over the next few months, Bobby became a constant in our lives. He'd show up to fix things that weren't broken, bring dinner when no one asked, and hold Emma during her colicky evenings when nothing else would soothe her. He taught me about construction, about reading blueprints and understanding load-bearing wall skills that seemed metaphorical for rebuilding a life. His daughter Emma, my Emma's namesake in an odd twist of fate, visited from Denver and immediately adopted us as family. She was everything I'd hoped to find in a sister-in-law, warm and funny and fiercely protective. She told me stories about her father, about how he'd been lost after her mother died, how saving us had given him purpose again. The criminal trial was scheduled for September, 6 months after the fire. Daniel had hired the best defense attorneys his rapidly dwindling resources could afford, but the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage showed everything: him seeing my car, making his choice, driving away, while flames consumed the vehicle where his pregnant wife was trapped. But before the trial could begin, Daniel made one last catastrophic decision. Rather than face the consequences of his actions, he fled. He emptied what remained of his accounts, got in his car, and disappeared. The FBI added him to their wanted list, but he'd planned well, probably crossing into Mexico before anyone realized he was gone. Sophia's husband divorced her immediately, taking their shared assets and returning to his deployment with a broken heart but intact dignity. She tried reaching out to me once, leaving a voicemail about how we'd both been victims of Daniel's manipulation. I deleted it without responding. She'd been willing to let me burn too, standing there safe in Daniel's arms while I fought for my life. That wasn't manipulation. That was complicity. Emma's first birthday arrived, with the Colorado spring bringing wildflowers and a chance to reflect on the year that had transformed everything. We'd moved into our own apartment by then, a cozy 2-bedroom that Bobby had inspected thoroughly before I'd signed the lease. He'd become Emma's unofficial grandfather, the only father figure she'd ever known, though we were careful not to label what was growing between us. The birthday party was small but perfect. My mother made her famous chocolate cake. Lisa flew in from Seattle with an embarrassing number of presents, and Bobby's daughter brought her new boyfriend to meet the family we'd all somehow become. Emma destroyed her personal cake with enthusiasm that made everyone laugh, her face covered in frosting as she grinned at the camera. That evening, after everyone had gone home and Emma was asleep, Bobby and I sat on the balcony watching the sunset. We'd done this dozens of times, comfortable in silence that didn't need filling. But tonight felt different, charged with possibility. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice careful, "about timing and second chances and things that shouldn't work but do." I knew what he was trying to say because I'd been thinking it too. The age difference, the circumstances of our meeting, the trauma that had brought us together, all of it suggested this shouldn't work. But Emma lit up when she saw him, reached for him when she was scared, had said her first word, Bob, while pointing at his face. And I'd found myself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that had nothing to do with gratitude. "We're not a conventional family," I said, "but we're a real one." He took my hand, then his scarred fingers gentle around mine, the same way they'd been in the ambulance when I thought my world was ending. Instead, it had been beginning, just not in any way I could have imagined. We took things slowly, carefully aware that Emma's well-being came before any romantic considerations. But love, real love, doesn't follow timelines or expectations. It shows up in burned hands, pulling you from flames in midnight feedings, and shared silence in the quiet building of trust after betrayal has shattered your foundations. Daniel was arrested 14 months after the fire, caught trying to cross back into the United States with a fake passport. The trial was swift. The evidence was undeniable. He was sentenced to 5 years for criminal negligence and endangerment, plus another 2 for fleeing prosecution. His mother attended every day, shrinking into herself as the full extent of her son's actions was laid bare. I testified via video link, unwilling to be in the same room as him, but needing to speak my truth. I told the court about the moment of his choice, the calculation in his eyes, as he decided which woman deserved to live. I told them about Emma, who would grow up without a biological father because he'd chosen to abandon us twice, first in flames and then in flight. His allocution was everything I'd expected: self-pitying, blame-shifting, and ultimately hollow. He claimed stress from work had clouded his judgment, that Sophia had pursued him, that the fire had spread too quickly for him to save everyone. But the prosecutor played the security footage again, those crucial seconds where he stood at my door, hand on the handle, then turned away. No amount of words could erase that image. The civil suit settled out of court once he was convicted. His insurance and remaining assets went into a trust for Emma, enough to ensure she'd have opportunities regardless of what life threw our way. It wasn't about the money, though. It was about justice, about ensuring that choices have consequences, that you can't walk away from the people you're supposed to protect without paying a price. Bobby and I married 2 years after the fire in a tiny ceremony in my mother's backyard. Emma was our flower girl, toddling down the aisle, throwing petals with chaotic enthusiasm that had everyone laughing. Bobby's daughter stood as my maid of honor, my mother gave me away, and Lisa officiated with a speech about chosen families that had everyone crying. I wore a simple white dress that didn't hide the scars on my arms from the broken glass. Bobby's hands shook as he placed the ring on my finger, this strong man who'd pulled me from death, now promising to stand beside me in life. When he kissed me, Emma shrieked, "Daddy," and the word was so natural, so right, that no one corrected her. We bought a house the following year, a fixer-upper that Bobby renovated room by room, teaching me about foundations and support beams, about building something solid enough to weather any storm. Emma had a pink bedroom with a window seat where she could watch the mountains, and a backyard big enough for the swing set Bobby built with his own hands. Sometimes I think about the woman I was before the fire, driving through that storm to deliver a USB drive to a man who was betraying me. She feels like a stranger now, someone who accepted less than she deserved because she didn't know her own worth. The fire that almost killed me also burned away everything false in my life, leaving only what was real and strong enough to survive. Emma looks nothing like Daniel, a blessing I'm grateful for every day. She has my mother's eyes and Bobby's determination, a combination that promises she'll never accept less than complete devotion from anyone who claims to love her. When she asks about her biological father someday, I'll tell her the truth, that Bobby is her real father, the one who chose us, who showed up when it mattered, who built our life, board by board and nail by nail. The stranger who saved my life became my husband, my daughter's father, my foundation for rebuilding after betrayal. He likes to say he was just in the right place at the right time, but I know better. He was sent to that mountain road, to that moment of crisis, because sometimes the universe provides exactly what you need when everything else falls apart. My story isn't about the man who left me to burn. It's about the man who pulled me from the flames and the family we built from ashes. 5 years have passed since that terrible day on the mountain road. Emma starts kindergarten next month, a bright, fearless child who approaches life with joy. That suggests she inherited none of the trauma surrounding her birth. She knows Bobby as Daddy knows his daughter, as Aunt Emma knows my mother as Grandma who makes the best cookies in Colorado. This is her family, complete and whole, lacking nothing. Daniel remains in federal prison, though he'll be eligible for parole next year. His mother sends a card on Emma's birthday each year, always addressed incorrectly, always containing a check I deposit into Emma's college fund without comment. She's never asked to meet her granddaughter, perhaps understanding that some bridges burn too completely to rebuild. Sophia disappeared after the trial, moving to another state to start over where no one knew her as the woman who stood by while a pregnant woman burned. I heard through legal channels that she'd remarried, had children of her own. I hope she teaches them about choices, about integrity, about the moments that define who you really are when everything is at stake. Bobby's construction business has grown, taking on larger projects, hiring crews of men who respect him not just as a boss, but as someone who does the right thing when it matters. He comes home each evening covered in dust and satisfaction, lifting Emma onto his shoulders while she shrieks with delight. These are the moments that matter, the small daily choices to show up, to be present, to choose love over convenience. My mother moved to a smaller house 10 minutes away, close enough to babysit, but far enough to give us privacy. She's dating now, a retired teacher named Frank, who brings her flowers and makes her laugh like I haven't heard since before my father died. Watching her find love again in her 70s gives me hope that it's never too late to start over, to choose happiness after loss. Lisa became Emma's godmother and our family lawyer, handling everything from our will to the ongoing management of Emma's trust. She flew in last month with news of her own pregnancy, a miracle after years of trying. Our daughters will grow up together, cousins by choice if not by blood, raised by women who know their worth. I returned to work when Emma turned 3, taking a position at a nonprofit that helps domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives. My story, while extreme, resonates with women who've been abandoned in different kinds of fires. I teach them what Bobby taught me, that surviving isn't enough, that you deserve to thrive, to be loved by someone who'd run into flames for you rather than away from them. The scars on my arms have faded to white lines that I don't hide. They're part of my story, proof of survival, reminders that I'm stronger than fire. When Emma traces them with her small fingers and asks about the marks, I tell her they're warrior stripes earned in a battle that brought her into existence. Bobby and I are trying for another child, a sibling for Emma, who will be born into love from the first breath. The fertility issues that plagued my marriage to Daniel haven't appeared with Bobby, as if my body knows the difference between a safe partnership and one built on deception. If it happens, wonderful. If not, Emma is enough, more than enough, everything we need. Sometimes I drive past that scenic overlook where everything changed. They've added better lighting and emergency call boxes, safety measures that might help the next person in crisis. I don't stop, just note its existence and keep driving toward home, toward the life built from the ashes of the old one. The nightmares have mostly stopped, though. Sometimes I wake smelling smoke that isn't there, feeling heat that exists only in memory. Bobby holds me through these moments, his presence solid and real, an anchor to the present, where we're safe, where we're chosen, where we're whole. Last week, Emma asked why she has 2 Aunt Emmas, Bobby's daughter and Lisa. I explained that sometimes families grow in unexpected ways, that love multiplies rather than divides, that the more people who love you, the richer your life becomes. She accepted this with the easy wisdom of children, then asked if we could have pizza for dinner. This is what happiness looks like after trauma, ordinary moments strung together like pearls, each one precious, because you know how easily they could have never existed. Pizza dinners and bedtime stories, Halloween costumes and scraped knees, marriage built on trust so solid it could hold up a house. When people ask how we met, Bobby and I share a look over Emma's head, a whole conversation in a glance. We say it was dramatic that he saved my life, leaving out the darker details until Emma's older. But the truth is more complex and beautiful than a simple rescue story. We saved each other. He pulled me from burning metal and broken glass, and I pulled him from the grief that had trapped him since his wife's death. Emma saved us both, giving us purpose beyond survival, a reason to build something worth protecting. We're a family forged in fire, stronger for having been tested, precious because we chose each other when choosing to walk away would have been easier. If you've ever been abandoned in your darkest moment, if someone you trusted chose themselves over your survival, know this: their betrayal doesn't define your worth. The right person will run toward your flames, not away from them. They'll pull you from the wreckage and help you rebuild board by board, nail by nail, until you've created something stronger than what burned. Have you ever experienced betrayal that ultimately led to something better? When did you realize that losing someone toxic meant gaining space for someone genuine? Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes our survival stories light the way for others still trapped in their burning cars. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of survival, redemption, and the families we build from the ashes of the ones that failed us. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that abandonment can be the beginning of something better, not the end of everything. Thank you for listening to my journey from flames to family, and remember, the person who saves you might be a stranger today, but family tomorrow. The real tragedy isn't being left to burn, it's never discovering who'll run through flames to reach you.